It's a great pleasure being here. I'm going to, with your permission, to talk about the reasons for the amount of aggression that is done around the world in the name of Islam. What are the reasons? And go through some of the issues why we are faced with this problem. You know, last night I was listening to the debate. Anybody who listened to the debate last night? And at the end of it, I don't know whether you saw it or not, but there was a panorama of topics that were very important last year compared to this year. You remember? There was problems with economy last year, that was number one. This year it was Islam. Is the number one priority of the Americans. And there is an incredible interest in this subject. You know, about 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, I was in Turkey. And I was walking with my wife in Istanbul, Constantinople, and this Turk, suddenly I saw him bend down, this lady, and pick up a piece of paper. There was some Arabic written on it. And she kissed it, put it on her eyes, her brow, out of matter of respect, and put it on a shelf in one of the windows, because it shouldn't be on the ground. And so when she passed away, I went and looked at this piece of paper. What was it that she was kissing? It was actually a newspaper, Arabic newspaper. And but it was Arabic.
The name of
It could have been the Quran, a piece of the Quran. And so she wasn't going to, as a Turk, she wasn't going to take any chances. She kissed it, put it there. Now that was one reaction. Now a few weeks ago with my family, we were in Key West. It was a bit of a disappointment, I must say. You know, it's not my kind of scene. But the children, the grandchildren enjoyed it. They were celebrating our retirement, but they were doing more of the celebration than I was. Anyway, we were in a restaurant called Blue Haven. Is that right? Blue Heaven. Blue Heaven. There was this young group playing music, and very loud. And there was a little chair, stool left there. It was very crowded. So I sat there, and I was working on the spiritual teachings of the Quran that has been forgotten by the Muslims, and so I had the Arabic text on my computer, and I saw, and other people saw, that they were with their iPhones, they were photographing this in case they had a member of the ISIS in Key West. Now that would be one of the last places ISIS would go, but they weren't taking any chances. So I kind of turned the thing towards them so that they could actually take a better picture and increase the magnification of the thing. But it's an incredible interest. And my own interest it became heightened, I should say, about 12 years ago. I was in the middle of an operation on a 5-year-old kid, and we had 5 or 6 catheters in this 5-year-old, trying to figure out where this rhythm was coming from in the heart. And the anesthesiologist, the kid was sleeping, and the nurses were there, and suddenly the X-ray equipment, the lights went out, and you were blinded, you can't see, and you've got 5 wires inside a little heart. Not a very safe thing. So I told the technician, go out and see which of the fuses had gone. And he comes back and says, they've hit New York. So what are you talking about? Please get the thing working, because this is not a safe thing. So he goes out and comes back and says, they hit the Pentagon. And then we realized there was a problem. And we didn't know what had hit us. They said, cover up all the vents. We didn't know it was a gas attack, what it was.
Did you get a flashlight?
Sorry?
Did you get a flashlight in the meantime?
Yeah. Well, no, we took the catheters out, and brought the child back, and so I began, because as Baha'is we believe in Islam, and so what had made this religion attack and kill about 1,000 people and destroy? What had happened? Flying their aeroplanes into the Twin Towers. We stayed around the whole day waiting to be flown to New York to see what we could do, but the word came that they were really all dead. There weren't that many injured, so we were not needed. So I started writing this book, which Kavian mentioned. It says Islam at the Crossroads. And the subject has become more and more interesting, to be honest. When I started, let's say in 1990s, there were about 100 people killed in the name of Islam over a decade. Between 2000 and 2010, there were more than 7,000 people killed in the name of Islam. In the 2010 and 2015, 5 years, there were more than 7,000 people killed. So there's been an exponential increase. You understand? Exponential is not just a nice linear line. It keeps getting more and more worse. So you have the attacks in Paris, you have the attacks in California, in Chattanooga. It's coming home. You had that policeman being shot, and you had Indonesia. It's just accelerating. So the first thing before we look at the issues that's causing this, one has to know that there is a problem. Okay, in medicine, if you know that there is a problem, if you admit there is a problem, because you can easily get in what's called folie à deux, madness in two people. Sometimes when somebody in the household is mad, the other people in the house also pretend that this is kind of normal, so they start behaving like the mad person. So when you go to that house, you don't know which one is the mad one, which one is the others pretending. This is called folie à deux. So you have to know that there is actually a madness and that there is an issue. Now, what are the causes of this issue? Now, the situation in the world as affects Islam is that much more tragic because Islam stands for peace. The word Islam comes from a word which means peace and purity. Salama, peace and purity. Very much akin to the Hebrew word shalom. So, if you're a Muslim, you say salama alaikum, peace be upon you. I mean, if you have somebody in a desert and he's got a dagger and you've got a dagger, it's kind of nice for him to say peace be upon you. Or if you're in the desert in another part of the world, it's nice if he says shalom, peace, and he says you back shalom. Shalom and salam is the same. It's people who cannot say sh, they say se. These are called shibboleths. And it's a religion that created peace. It wasn't just stood for peace, it created peace so at one stage, from the wall of China to the middle of Spain, you could travel in peace. While in Europe, at the same time, in the feudal Europe, you had to go with knights, and you had to go from the protection of one castle, one baron, to another baron. It was a feudal state. So what happened? And I would like to go about 7 or 8 different causes of why this has happened. And it will continue to happen. It will accelerate, and because at issue, as it says in the Quran, it says, في قلوبهم مرض. In their heart there is a disease. It's a spiritual disease. It's a disease of the heart. So that's the diagnosis of the Quran. It says في قلوبهم مرض. This is in Surah Al-Baqarah. There's a disease in their heart. So again, if it's a spiritual disease, then it requires a spiritual answer. In other words, there is no way in which you can bomb this out, carpet bomb it out of existence. You cannot, it's not a social problem that if you give them enough education, or if you give them enough money, or if you do some social engineering, you're going to eliminate this problem. So, how has this happened? Well, one of the, and I'll enumerate them and then I'll go back, and one of them is to do with the inability of the individual to think for themselves, to investigate the truth. They imitate. They follow their leaders. That's one of the issues. In the Quran it says that, remember me, God says, remember me and I shall remember you. In the Christianity it says, ask and
It shall be answered unto you.
Yeah, ask and it shall be answered. Seek,
And ye shall find.
knock,
And it shall be opened.
yes. So you have to do some asking and seeking and knocking. Then God will answer. You have to knock on the door of heaven, and then the gates of heaven are open to you. You have to take the first step. You have to investigate the truth. So there are 114 chapters to the Quran, okay? And each one of them takes a name of a word used in one of the chapters. They're called surahs, 114 of them. And they're divided into verses called ayahs. Now, in the 29th chapter, in verse 69, it says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ فِي سُبُلِنَا. And those who strive, who makes an effort in God's path, in this investigation, if they really want to investigate, then he says we will guide them. So the guidance is contingent to a sincere effort on the part of a sincere seeker. If you seek, then you, and Baha'u'llah quotes this in his writings, in the Kitab-i-Iqan. So you have to do that. You have to take the first step. That has been lost. Now, if you go to the origins of every religion, you find that at the beginning, there are individuals, that's how the faith begins, individuals who investigate the truth for themselves. There was a black gentleman in the time of Muhammad called Bilal. If you go to the prominent mosques in Turkey, if you go there, it mentions Muhammad. They've got the name of Muhammad there. Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, Ali, there are four caliphs, Khulafai Rashidun, they are rightly guided. And then somewhere there's a placard to Bilal Habashi, this Ethiopian gentleman, who was one of the most prominent, in fact, the most prominent of Muhammad's disciples, was an African from Ethiopia. And he suffered. In the middle of the sun, they got him stretched out, they put a big stone on his chest, and he was completely dehydrated and exhausted and dead by the evening until they released him. Bilal Habashi. Now, how did Bilal become a Muslim? By investigating. He goes late at night and looks at it. There was another gentleman who was a Persian, Salman Farsi, who goes all the way from Iran, is Zoroastrian, goes all the way to Syria. From Syria, they tell him he really needs to go to Hejaz, to go because that's where it's going to happen. So he goes there and accepts Muhammad. Those are individuals who investigate the truth. The disciples of Christ were the same. Unfortunately, that desire to investigate the truth has been by the individual, which is his fundamental responsibility, has died out. They would rather go to big institutions, synagogues, churches, mosques, and sit there rows upon rows, and we don't have that. We don't have any clergy in the Baha'i faith. Nor am I certain that they were supposed to have any clergy in these religions, but the clergy at that time did have a function. They looked after the rituals. They even looked after the medical things. If somebody had leprosy, they would make a diagnosis of leprosy. They did the circumcision, all sorts of strange things they did. They had a function. Not everybody could read or write, so they did the reading of the scriptures. The scribes, they and they wrote it, and they explained it. Baha'u'llah says that that's not necessary anymore. And even then, some of the harshest words that these scriptures are used in their books is against the people in authority, in religious authority, who misguide humanity. The harshest words. In the Old Testament, as Baha'is, we don't really call it the Old Testament, it's the Tanakh, because it's only old in relationship to the New Testament. By the time the Old Testament is about 3,000 years old, 3,500 years old. The Old Testament is now 2,000 years old, so it's a relative thing. The Jews don't call it this is the Old Testament. For them it's the Tanakh, which stands for the Torah and the Nabivin, the prophets, and the Ketuvin, the writings. That's Tanakh. And there is a Noah, Abraham, many prophets, and one of their prophets says, and the sermons in that day will be howlings. You know who howls? The wolf. And it says in that day, the shepherds in that day, I'll be against them, because they will be, instead of feeding the sheep, they will be eating the sheep. And there's very harsh words used also by Christ in the Gospels. They have eyes, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. They have hearts, but they understand not. O you hypocrites, O you scorpions. It says, out of their mouths comes death. Out of their mouth comes death. There will be wolves in sheep's clothing. Chapter 24 of Matthew. They will look like the sheep, but they're not going to be. The Baha'is don't look like the sheep at all. We don't look. We are zebras, basically. So, there is also very harsh words, again, in the Quran against them. He says, O people of the book. The people of the book are the ones that have the book, they read it, and they interpret it. Why do you clothe truth with falsehood? So the individual has to investigate the truth. This is one of the Baha'i principles, but it's one of these spiritual principles. As a spiritual principles, it's eternal. Okay? It exists in Judaism. It exists in Christianity. Christ in St. John says, call no man teacher on earth. And then he says, call no man rabbi on earth. And then for a third time he says, call no man Father on earth, for there is one heavenly Father. Put your reliance on the heavenly Father. And that is the great sin of the clergy, is because they have killed the spirit of investigation of the truth by the individuals. The individual has again today to become empowered to investigate the truth for themselves. And it's very easy for the individual to know what the truth is. Very easy. As long as they use valid criteria. The criteria which are scriptural. What is the one criteria that Christ gives? Well done. By their fruits you shall know them. A good tree, he says, brings forth good fruit. And exactly the similar sort of analogy is used in the Quran. It says, a good tree has got its roots firmly in the ground, its branches are spread, and it gives its fruit. And a bad tree, says, brings forth bad fruit, and it says it has no permanence. Has no permanence to it. It dies out. So by their fruits, it's very easy for the individual to sit down and say, are the fruits, whatever the name is this fruit a good fruit? Does it bring love? Does it bring amity? Does it bring fellowship? Is it causing pain, destruction? A good tree, according to the Quran, if they're the followers of the Quran, a Muslim would readily recognize a good fruit and a bad fruit. And by their fruits you shall recognize them. So it's very, very simple. The fruit at the moment is pretty bad, pretty lethal. So we know that there is a problem, and we know that it's a spiritual disease. So what is any other way why this has come about? Apart from inability to investigate the truth. And we mentioned also this undue reliance on the clergy for spiritual guidance. When Christ says ask, he doesn't say immediately go and ask your father, Father Dimitri in your church, because he said nobody should be called father anyway. So when he says seek, it doesn't mean find out where he lives. Knock doesn't mean knock on his on his church. So there is that loss, which and too much reliance on the spiritual leaders. And it's amazing what hierarchy of religious leadership there is. From being an ordinary parish minister or priest to being a bishop, an archbishop, a cardinal, and then the Pope. There is no single justification for this in the Gospels. This is why it was so easy 500 years ago, for when the Reformation occurred, for them to debunk this whole thing, say we don't agree with it at all. If it was part of the Gospels, they would not have got rid of it. Now in Shia Islam, you can see how much there's hierarchy. To right at the top. So that's one of the issues. It's not a very big book, the Quran, this. The Gospels are even probably a tenth of this. The individual can investigate it themselves. Find out what's in it. We as Baha'is have been asked to study the Quran. Now, why have we been asked to study the Quran? And that was 60 years ago. And before that, Abdul Baha in the Tablets of Divine Plan to Canada, America, Greenland. Because, and if he had done that, we would be in a far better shape than we are now. One, the Guardian says it's essential to the presentation of our faith. At that time, there weren't hardly any Muslims in America, and you wondered why this sudden urgency for us as Baha'is to study the Quran. This is the guardian of the Baha'i faith, the head of the Baha'i faith, till 1957. Yes, yes. As Baha'is, we don't have any clergy, but we did have a head. Now it's a body called the Universal House of Justice. 9 elected people. The second reason why the beloved Guardian says that we should study the Bible and the Quran is that, particularly the Quran, is essential to our understanding of our own faith. It's a background of our faiths. You cannot adequately, understand the revelation of Baha'u'llah if you don't have a grasp of the Quran. You can't present it, you can't teach it. So we are to some extent paralyzed in understanding fully our own faith and also in presenting our faith. The third reason why we study the Quran is because we believe in what's called progressive revelation. That all these religions are part of the same faith of God, but they have been divided into different chapters of the same book, what are called dispensations. You have the dispensation of Noah, Abraham, you have the dispensation, that's a Christian term as well, dispensation of Christ. There was a dispensation of Muhammad, and then there's the dispensation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. One common faith, different dispensations. Every dispensation has a beginning and an end, but faith is eternal. Baha'u'llah says this is the eternal faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. So that brings me to the third or fourth reason why Islam is on the warpath. Also, why Jews have not become Christians, why Christians have not accepted Islam, why the Baha'i faith is persecuted by Islam. The answer to those questions is one answer. What is it? Why is it that they don't accept each other, they fight each other, and they also have killed 20,000 of the Babis and Baha'is, imprisoned. Why is that? Why did Baha'u'llah spend 39 years of his life in imprisonment? Why? No.
Because human beings are imperfect.
They're imperfect? I don't think they should be that imperfect.
Challenged to
They are not
power.
evolved.
Challenge to power? No. There is, if you, no.
You're saying because they didn't investigate.
Yeah, but what did the clergy, what's the objection of the clergy? No?
Personal interest.
No?
Clergy has to be right.
Interpretation of they couldn't
No.
understand the meaning.
No?
علمای عصر
You have to know this because this is very, very important. It's because every religion believes that they have the perfect religion from God, okay? The perfect religion from God. Their teacher, their prophet, messenger was the number one. And this is a final truth from God, an everlasting fruit. So when you got as a member of the Jewish faith, if you believe, and this is part of their scriptures. You can't say they're just making this up. When you go to the Deuteronomy, part of the Torah, in chapter 4 it says, don't add anything to this scripture. Don't subtract anything from the scripture. Deuteronomy 4:6. Don't add, don't subtract. What it means is that during that dispensation, the rabbis don't add, don't subtract, but they kept adding and subtracting. But when Christ appears, and he comes with certain new truth, they say, we can't have you. So there's a paradox, there is a problem, in that for 1,000 years, they pray for the coming of Christ, but when he comes with something new, they say, no. Ours was the final truth from God. You can come and support Moses, but you can't come with a new dispensation, with a new teachings.
I'm sorry.
Please.
My understanding is that he came as a Jew to the temple, as a Jew to the rabbis, and that he said that you have left the truth of what you have been taught and what you know, and therefore I hold you responsible for returning to the truth. And for that, he was considered a rebel, a zealot,
Yes.
a thief, and therefore was eradicated because he made too much sense to too much people.
That's right.
And he didn't call himself Christ, I don't think. I don't know too much about my own upbringing. So
Well,
you may-
we are here to learn because your faith is our faith, okay?
Yes, yes.
So, they were expecting the Messiah, Messiah, which means the anointed one.
Right.
Because in those days, that's how they selected their kings. If they wanted to know who the king was, the high priest, like Samuel, went and poured some very smelly oil while the guy was sleeping on the head, and people then, when he woke up, knew he was the king. So the Messiah was the anointed one. And now Messiah, that's in Aramaic, Hebrew is Messiah. In Greek, it is Christ, Christos. It means the same word. Christ and the Messiah are the same word in two different languages. So in Matthew, at the beginning of Matthew, chapter 5 of Matthew, he says, I have not come to destroy the law of Moses, I've not come to but I've come to fulfill. I have come so that you may have life, a spiritual life, but have it more abundantly. So the first thing they do is they confirm what has come before them. And the Quran, many times it says, This Quran is a confirmation of the Torah and the Gospels. Torah and Injil is a confirmation. It confirms what has happened in the past. But then they bring new social laws. And Christ begins to change some of the social laws of the Torah, some of the most revered. For example, he changes Sabbath, or diminishes Sabbath. His disciples were eating on Sabbath on Saturday, which was a no-no thing. I don't know if you've been to Israel.
For the religious.
On Saturday, even there's nobody operating the lifts. The lifts go up and down by themselves. You just jump in, jump off. And if you're in a hotel, all the eggs are cooked the night before, so you got cold eggs in the morning. You know, the table is set so that you don't, and the kettle goes on automatically, and nobody does any work. But then they found that his disciples were eating on Sabbath, and so the spiritual leaders of the Jews came and says, why are they doing something which is forbidden? And Christ says Sabbath was made for man, not man made for Sabbath. Brings it. He changes the law of divorce. He says, what God has brought together, let no man put asunder. He changes the law of retaliation, a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. He says, if somebody slaps you on this cheek, turn the other cheek. If somebody wants your coat, give your overcoat. In Californian language, it would be, if somebody wants your house, give him your yacht as well. That's a modern thing. But every time he says something like that, every time he's changing something, he says, you have heard that it was said in the old time. Now, who said it in the old time? Who said this? A tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye? Moses. Yes, Moses said it. But did Moses say it from himself? Because Moses says, I can of my own do nothing. As I hear, I speak. Moses doesn't say anything from himself. Christ also says the same thing. He does not speak of his own.
Speaks of the Father.
The Father, he says, whatever the Father tells him, he says it. He says, I can of my own do nothing in St. John. In the Quran it says, Muhammad says, I have not done anything, I've not spoken of my own volition, of my own desire. Baha'u'llah in the Siyar-Chal of Tehran, he's writing to Nasiruddin Shah. Later, he writes this in the Kitab Ibn Zeb, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. He says, Laisa haza minni, this is not from me, but from thy Lord. So they don't speak of themselves, but whatever they're told. So when Christ says, you have heard that it was said of old, do this, do that, who said it then? God. Isn't that right? But the God of the Old Testament, what's he called?
Jehovah.
Jehovah, Yahweh, Eloah, Eli.
God, the one whose name must not be spoken.
Yes. So when Christ says, you have heard that it was said of old, do this, but now I say unto you, do this, who is the I now? It's God again, isn't it? Because he says, I can't do any of this, I don't say any of this by myself. So who's this I now, this God? What's he called? God the Father. But it's the same God. Different names, the same God. Now what's happened in that 800, 1,000 years? When God said this, now he's saying that. Has his knowledge has increased? Has he got more experience? Or is it, as the Baha'i Faith explains, that the capacity of individuals has increased? Moses, because through the teachings of Moses, they are now able to receive what Christ gives them. So the faith is one, but the but the teachings evolve. So there is this concept of things progressing and new teachings coming, confirmation of the past, teachings for the present, and a mention of things that will happen in the future. So every religion accepts the religions that have preceded it. Christianity accepts Judaism. Islam accepts Christianity and Judaism, but each one of them has a problem with the next one.
For the next one, challenges it?
Because it's a challenge. The very existence means, what does it mean? Is that your dispensation has finished, ended. It means that all the rabbis have to, in the time of Christ, to now sacrifice themselves for Christ. So this is the issue. So the revelation of the Bab, the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, like John the Baptist, the revelation of the Bab was a signal that the Islam had come to an end. When the Bab turns to Mullah Hussein and says, all these signs are manifest in me, I am the Qa'im, he who shall arise, Nabil, the historian, records the year, records the month, records the day, records the hour. Because in that day and in that hour, one dispensation gives way to another resurrection, to another dispensation. That is, according to the Bayan Farsi, it says that that is the resurrection of Islam begins there. So, Christianity as well. In the end of Revelation, it says, don't add, don't subtract. If you add anything to this book, it says in Revelation, God will add all the medical problems that we have mentioned, like the plague, leprosy, many, many of them in the Bible. God will give you all these problems, will add them to you. If you subtract anything from this book, God will subtract your name from the book of God. Don't add, don't subtract. So in Islam as well, so they've got these one or two verses which show a finality, exclusivity, and that prevents them from accepting the next dispensation, although that is what they've been praying for. In the Quran, there are two things that a mullah or a mujtahid will immediately object. To say that, for example, in Christianity, if you were in the Southern Belt, and as soon as you mention the Baha'i faith, they will bring an exclusive, there are hundreds of verses about that God will again establish his kingdom on earth, but, and there's a prayer that they will read again this Sunday, O Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, please send your kingdom. They'll be praying for the coming of the kingdom, but when they're presented with the evidences of the kingdom, what will they say? Christ was the way, the only way, and no one goes to the Father. So that's complete. In the Quran as well, they will find two verses. There are two verses in the Quran which says that there's finality to that religion. He says that Muhammad is Khatamun Nabi'in, is the seal of the prophets. Finish. The discussion finishes. And in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is the 5th chapter of the Quran, this is the last, chronologically, is the last chapter of the Quran, is the 114th chapter. And in that chapter, it goes through all the social laws, what they can eat, what they can drink, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And at the end of it, it says, now I have completed the religion for you. It's complete. And I've called this religion Islam. Okay, the religion is complete. Muhammad is Khatam al-Nabiyyin, he's the seal of the prophets. There is a finality. So, because of that finality, they reject the revelation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, which is their soul salvation. So they deprive themselves of the remedy. So since 1844, Islam has deprived itself of the spiritual remedy. This is a spiritual disease, fi qulubuhum maradun, and that spiritual disease can only be cured by Baha'u'llah's teaching. So, finality. So as a side thing, in the first conference, what is the first Babi Baha'i conference called? Badasht. What were the two objectives of Badasht? Do you know this conference?
Claim the independence of the Baha'i faith and
Well done.
also establish.
The first objective, which they failed miserably, was to save the Bab from prison. And God passes by, says, they failed miserably. The second one was to declare that the dispensation of Islam had ended, and that this was a new revelation, new dispensation. Now, what was the most dramatic way in which they could demonstrate this? Was for Tahireh to remove her veil. That wasn't a gender thing, it wasn't that Tahireh, to be honest, it wasn't that he was, striking a blow for gender equality. That wasn't the issue. That was a side benefit. The main, sorry?
She no longer had to be hidden.
Yes, because this was hijab in Islam, and that has been abrogated, cancelled by the Bab. So you see, this is the issue, is that how many months does a baby, I should know this.
Yes, you should.
I should. It wasn't my best suit. Obstetrics and gynecology was not my best suit. But I believe it's 9 months. If it happens too quickly, it's premature. Now, if it goes beyond 9 months, it becomes what?
Maturated.
It doesn't become a better baby. In fact, it starts
It can be
worse. Post-mature, and it becomes so you have to give medicines to get it out. Okay, because the womb becomes a harmful situation for it. In 1844, the Bab comes, the dispensation of Islam comes to an end. And that is according to the Quran itself. He says in the Surah Al-A'raf, he says, وَلَكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلٌ. For every ummah, which is for every dispensation, for every nation, for every people, Ummatul Islamiyah, the nation of Islam, وَلَكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلٌ. There is an ajal. There is a predestined death, end to every ummah. وَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ. And when that ajal comes, لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. You cannot extend it by 1 hour, nor retard it by 1 hour. Ya Bani Adam, O humanity, إِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُمْ رُسُلٌ مِّنْكُمْ يَقُصُّونَ عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِي. Verily messengers shall come unto you from God, explaining my verses to you. So if you believe in Khatam al-Nabiyyin, if you believe in that Surah Al-Ma'idah had the last social things, you have to also know that there will be Rasulun, which is the plural of Rasul, messengers in plural will come unto you. At least 2 of them will come unto you. Yaghasuna alaykum ayati, explaining to you my verses. So when Baha'u'llah comes and says in Basharat, we have abrogated Holy war. Holy war,
Jihad.
jihad, exists in the Quran. It exists in the Bible. It exists in the Old Testament. It exists in the New Testament.
Oh, yeah.
Baha'u'llah comes and he says, for the first time, we give you the glad news, glad tidings, that there is no necessity for you to defend God's faith with the sword. Use the swords of your tongue. So that's in Basharat. So if you're deprived from the medicine, then you've got a problem. In the Quran itself, it says, talking about post-mature babies, it says that whenever age afflicts an individual, they start going in the reverse direction. And I think I'm beginning to experience that.
Sometimes.
You know, age, so there is a defined period of time beyond which there is a reversal. There is an ajal. Ajal is very important. I always use this poor armadillo in Arizona. You drive your car, you go over an armadillo. You stop, you look at the poor squashed armadillo. As a Persian, you would say it's ajal was there. Oh my love, it wasn't my fault. It was a predestined death. It was just this.
God's will.
So now you can imagine that every Baha'i is not due to, all those things are important, prejudice, power, and all this. But beyond all that, the most important thing, the Baha'i faith, this is why they go into prison, this is why they get killed, is because when you stand there as a Baha'i, you stand for the end of the dispensation of Islam, Ummatul Islam. So next time they say, why are they persecuting the Baha'is in Iran? You say, it has to do with finality, exclusivity, superiority, as opposed to progressive revelation, the oneness of faith. Okay. So that is one of the most important reasons, is that now for 150 years, Islam has been deprived of the divine graces of Baha'u'llah's teachings. When you study the Baha'i faith, you find that it divides a religion into two aspects. One is called the essential aspects of a religion. The essential aspects of religion are, this is by Abdul Baha, the essential aspects of religion are the spiritual teachings. Love, unity, harmony, fellowship, truthfulness, justice, respect. These are the essential. This is common in all the religions. The essential aspects of religion do not change. And then it is what is called the non-essentials. Non-essential doesn't mean that they are not needed, but they can change with the passage of time. You can have a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye in a desert area, either in Arabia or in Moses' time, but it gets changed to another social law of being slapped on one cheek and turning the other cheek. Those are the social laws which change. Jihad is one of them. Gender inequality is another one. These are the non-essentials. So when you don't accept the Baha'u'llah, what happens is that these non-essentials of long time ago, they continue to be promoted. Supported. So you don't need to, in fact, get in touch with ISIS in Syria. You can be in Chattanooga. You find a book on your shelf, or or you can Google it, you can read about it, and it's a powerful book, and it had a powerful effect on humanity. It transformed humanity. You get excited about it, especially about its spiritual teachings, but then you also have to follow its social teachings. And the social teachings of 1500 years ago are different from today.
I hope so.
The problems Islam faced at that time were different. But then you start saying, well, maybe we had it good at that time. Maybe we should do it again and regain the same power we had before. So this poor government trying to find out who did they connect with in Syria and all this. No, it's just on the book, on the shelf. And if you want the book, you just apply to, you get it for free. You can apply to the Saudi Arabian embassy, and they will send you immediately a free copy of the Quran, translation of Al-Hilali, one of the worst translations. But, you get a free Quran, Arabic and the English side by side each other. So you need to differentiate between the social teachings and the spiritual teachings. The spiritual teachings of Judaism, Christianity, that love that Christ talked about, this is how men shall know you to be my followers. This is how Christ defines a Christian. By this shall men know you to be my followers, how much love you have one for the other. Baha'u'llah has brought that love, which was at a tribal stage in the time of Moses, to a city stage in the time of Christ, to a nation stage in the time of Muhammad, to a world stage in the time of Baha'u'llah. He has also come so that humanity may have life and have it more abundantly. This is critical, that unless they admit the issue and the problem, and that, yes, Islam as an eternal faith, we believe that we are Muslims too, we believe we are Christians, we are followers of Moses as well, faith is eternal, but then there is the dispensation, and unless they listen to Baha'u'llah's teachings for this day and age, it causes an issue. It's like medicine. I mentioned this before. When in medicine, if a lady comes in with very strange illnesses, bizarre illnesses, we ask, can we please see what medicines you have in your handbag? And you open her handbag and you'll see the explanation for all her illnesses. There are bottles there, prescribed in 1968 by Dr. McCormick. Dr. McCormick has died himself. The medicine he prescribed, he can't remember what it was for. And the capsules were probably green and white. Now they're kind of yellow and bluish. Before it cured something, now it adds to the disease. But they will still believe that that was a good physician and his medicine worked, and therefore they have to be loyal to it. So out of loyalty to these dispensations, they reject the medicine that will cure them. So that's another issue. This is, let me just read this passage. I don't know where I wrote it. There it is. This is in the, Baha'u'llah says in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, which was the last major work that he wrote. Which year did Baha'u'llah pass away?
1892. 1892.
So this was written a year before that, 1981. The last major book that Baha'u'llah wrote. And in it, he writes, religious fanaticism and hatred. There's a triple prophecy here. Baha'u'llah writes, just a few sentences, writes. And where is Baha'u'llah at the moment writing this? Akko. which was the penal colony of the Ottoman Empire, which was the Caliphate. So he was a prisoner of the Caliphate. They were trying to establish the Caliphate. He was their prisoner. And he writes, religious fanaticism and hatred are world-embracing fires. He predicts that this was going to become world-embracing. Nothing had happened to California at that time, in Texas.
Spain was having a problem.
Nothing had happened. So he says, religious fanaticism and hatred are world-embracing fires. In other words, it will become world-embracing. And then he says, whose violence none can quench. No one will be able to put out this fire. Russia, United States, they've run out of, I saw in the USA that they run out of bombs, Tomahawk missiles. They pour so much in that area. There's enough money, millions given to the Palestinians to make every sheep and goat there a millionaire. Doesn't change. في قلوبهم مرض, the spiritual disease. And then it says, the third one, it says, the hand of divine power, God alone, can deliver mankind from this devastating affliction. Only God alone, the transformation of God's word, the divine word, is the only thing that can change the human heart. He says that is what we have been empowered to achieve. So, as long as they are deprived of that power, the issues will worsen and worsen. Now, the book itself is called Islam at the Crossroads. Why I chose that title is because it appears in Jeremiah, Ermiah, the prophet of the Old Testament, he says, when you come to the crossroads, and you're investigating the truth, and you come to the crossroads, and you don't know whether to turn right, whether to turn left, what should you do? The prophet says, well, look where you've come from, investigate where you've come from, then you'll know where to proceed. All right? Islam is also at this strange crossroads. Some people realize there is an issue. Some Muslims realize there's a real issue. So they say, maybe we are not being true to the Word of God. We have to go back to the fundamentals. These are the fundamentalists. We've got to go back to the origins. These are the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, or the very fundamentalist Shia of Iran. We have to go back to the origin to see how Muhammad did 1500 years ago. Back to the Sunnah. So they turned right. Then comes the ones who say, no, we clearly that didn't work and it's causing problems. I think we can change some of the things ourselves. So they start interpreting things themselves in liberal terms. They turn left. The problem with the lefties is that if you can change the religion yourself, interpret it yourself, then you can come with your own religion. Don't you think that God, who initially brought the religion in the first place, when he thought the time was right, he cannot bring another one? You have to change it. You have to modify it. So the ones that are called really good Muslims, the liberal ones, are really regarded as bad Muslims by the fundamentalists. Whenever you come to a crossroad, again, Baha'u'llah says exactly the same as what Jeremiah says. It's the Baha'i method taught in the Iran, the Book of Certitude. He says, consider the past. One of the first sentences of the Kitab Iran, it says, consider the past. Look back. And then he goes through all that has happened to the prophets of the past. They all had the same issues. They've all had the same objections. They've all been able to transform their environment. If you know their objections, then the Baha'i faith will be clear to you. So you study the past. Then you know how to move forward. So that's another valid way of investigating the truth. So they're deprived of that. Also, another issue with Islam that's causing all the hatred is not only that Baha'u'llah has changed the social laws of Islam, those harsh laws, and there are some really harsh laws. Beheading is part of the Quran. The cutting of the hands for theft is part of the Quran. Stoning is not part of the Quran. You know, it just shows that they added things as well.
Yeah, it's Hebrew.
But there are harsh laws in the Old Testament, there are harsh laws and unless you go to the next dispensation, the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, you don't know that it is ended, those things are ended. But beyond the social laws, the spiritual laws of Islam have been forgotten by the Muslims, and that is another. So not only are they not following the new social laws and insisting on the old harsh laws, medicines which were for a different disease, different age, but they also have forgotten the spiritual laws. The beginning of almost every chapter of the Quran starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. You know, God has 99 names. With Allah, it becomes 100. These are called Asma al-Husna, the beautiful names of God. Two of those names is that He's the Ar-Rahman, He's the Ar-Rahim. He's the most beneficent. He's the most merciful. Now, why is that mercy, divine mercy and compassion not being shown? It means that they are out of touch with the spiritual teachings of Islam. He's Ar-Rauf, the clement, the kind-hearted God. He's Al-Muqsid, the just. He's Al-Adil, again the just, the equitable. He says, we have commanded justice. In two places in the Quran, it says, justice has been commanded unto you. Now, all the injustices that are being performed in the name of Islam, is that the fault of the Islam? No, these are spiritual laws. Justice is very, very important. The best beloved in my sight, Baha'u'llah says, is justice. You know, one of the statements of the Quran is actually in Harvard Law School, is written on their things, where it says that a Muslim is just even if it's against his own or her own interests. He still does justice. In the Quran, it says that all the previous religions are part of the same faith of God. It says, we have prescribed unto you, it says in the Quran, the same religion as we prescribed to Moses. as we prescribed to Jesus and to the asbat, to the tribes, through the prophets. It's the same religion. It's the same din. He says, do not make a division in that din. And this is very difficult for the mushrikeen. Mushreks are those that divide things into 2 or 3. There's one God. Timothy says God is one. The Catholic Church says, no, there are 3 gods, Trinity. They divide it up. Anybody who divides the one single faith of God is a mushrek in the eyes of the Quran. That's shirk. You're not supposed to divide things up. You may mention them as dispensations, but you remember that these names and these social laws which they differ are really temporary and non-essentials. They are in essence one. All the prophets of God, Baha'u'llah says in the Kitab-i-Iran, abide in the same tabernacle, utter the same speech, proclaim the same faith, are seated upon the same throne, soar in the same heaven. They are one and the same. That's what it says in the Quran as well. So a true Muslim realizes that when they are fighting with the Jews, when they're fighting with the Christians, when they're fighting with these religions and regard them as a separate religion with which they are at war with, they're not following Islam. In another passage, it says, do not divide the religion into sects. Because it says, as Muslims, we are one. All the Muslims are brothers. Do not divide into sects. Into Shias, which Shia means a sect, a party. It actually is against the very Quran to be part of a sect which is called Shia, or to be a Sunni, a Hanafi, a Shafi, Hanbali, all these divisions that exist. Baha'i is a different religion. These are divisions within the religion. Mm-hmm. And you're quite right. What is your name, dear?
Hattie Jane.
Hattie
Jane.
Hattie Jane, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, that you make a very important point. And this is why in the Baha'i faith it says that the Baha'i faith has not come as a new religion to add to the number of names that already exist. This is in the world order of Baha'u'llah. He says, we do not consider ourselves a new religion, even a new religion, but it's a renewal of faith. The Baha'i faith has not come to add to the names that already exist, but to show their fundamental oneness, that there is one God, one faith, and one humanity. And that's part of really, so these divisions that exist, this hatred, it says in the Quran that do not even build a mosque if it causes mischief. How clearer can this be? Do not build a mosque if it causes mischief. It says God does not love mischief, fasad. Beyond that, I was amazed, really, when I started delving into this, how much of this holy book, of this book, is about the coming of Baha'u'llah. There's a whole chapter, chapter 78 of the Quran, which is called the Great Announcement, Nabaya Azim, the Great Announcement, which will be announced twice. It's interestingly that, Many of the prophecies about the coming of the future are in twos. There will be 2 trumpets. There will be 2 paradises. There will be 2 fountains of water of life. And there will be 2 announcements, and there will be 2 rejections. But the Quran also knows that when that great message does come, it will be rejected. And so in the Quran it says, وَلَوْ فَاسِقٌ, even if an alleged evildoer comes to you with a naba, with a message, فَتَبَيَّنُوا, clear it up immediately in case you lead yourself and a whole qawm, a whole people astray. He knows that the next one will be regarded as a fasiq. He says, even balaw fasiqun, even a fasiq comes with a naba, clear it up, with a promise that the great message from God will come. So they have been deprived of that grace. Is it any surprise that we are in the mess we are? Because the religion itself, if they adhere to the spiritual laws, which have been restated and revoiced to humanity by Baha'u'llah, if they follow the social laws which have been changed by Baha'u'llah, which are non-essential, they change with passage of time, then Islam will remain eternal. It was eternal before the coming of Muhammad. Abraham, it says in the Quran, was a Muslim. Jacob, Yaqub was a Muslim. The disciples of Christ were Muslim, because they, every one of them, in their own period of time, were obedient to God. They had tasallum, and that tasallum brought peace to a section of humanity. And today, Baha'u'llah has come to again resurrect and reanimate that faith. Thank you.